Welcome to this edition of Workplace Culture Wisdom, a conversation series with experienced leaders. Welcome to another edition of our Workplace Culture Wisdom series. Today, we're fortunate to have with us Dr. Jim Rankin, who recently retired as the president of South Dakota Mines, a very highly regarded college providing engineering and technical learning based in Rapid City, South Dakota. Jim's coming to us today from North Carolina. Hi, Jim.
Good morning.
Right. Jim, let's just begin and talk a little bit about your experience and role as a college president. You've had, as a college president, to navigate a variety of different workplace culture circumstances, as the different departments can be quite different in their internal cultures, whether it's in a faculty engineering department or the accounting department. So what's it been like for you to kind of hold all these varying different departmental cultures together into kind of a unit?
Well, you're exactly right that every department and every discipline has a different way of looking at things. And I think that's one of the things you pick up as president, or you pick up anytime you're sitting in a role where you're sitting across the entire university, is the way that those disciplines look at things, how they want to be communicated to, and making sure that you're taking into account those voices. And I think that, comes back to the communication, making sure that you're putting out a clean message. And as a president's position, that communication is important, but it turns out to be one of those challenges that you always wonder if you're really doing things right, because you'll send a message or you'll talk about something, and the next day you'll get a question that, why did you say this? And it turns out that, the message was missed. And so, and as different disciplines, we listen differently as well, or we read the context of a message differently. And so you really have to work and you have to be clear. And so it does become a challenge for those in a university.
One of the things that we work with, and that you've had some sense of that with our exploration in brain and behavioral science, is the notion that no news is often not interpreted as no news, that people will fill in the blanks with whatever they might interpret as the circumstance. And so I imagine that's a bit of a challenge also in ensuring that people aren't filling in the blanks with incorrect information.
That's exactly right. And sometimes something left unsaid, you get back a lot of different answers on what they thought you were meant to say, and so it really is a challenge. I probably should also have said that when we look at the different disciplines in a university, the student group and the student voice is also varied, but it's an important part of that conversation on how they interpret what's going on and how they interpret that something is happening. A couple of examples that I can think of in terms of the message. We had an opportunity to combine two positions. We thought that was more efficient. Well, I would get a lot of messages back saying, are we in financial trouble? We can't afford two positions. And that wasn't the case. It was just trying to be more efficient on how we ran the organization. But as you say, if you don't include something, then folks are going to look into it a different way than what you'd interpreted.
And universities in particular, but it can be the same also for some private businesses. You have the sort of the campus bubble, if you will, or community itself, but you also have a lot of external community to answer to, whether it's alumni or the town that you're located in. You got legislators. There's quite a range of other worldviews and cultural perspectives that you've got to navigate also.
Exactly right. And I think, that was one of the things that I really learned out of the book that Worldview Intelligence put out, is understanding the mindset. And you would have conflict, like you say, with legislators and some of the community and alumnus. But how do you understand where they're coming from? And I think that was an important part, or an important lesson in leadership that I learned as my time at president.
In a general sense, for someone new to a position, whether it's in a corporate position or university leadership position elsewhere, what kinds of advice do you have for them for navigating varieties of cultures?
It's one thing I've learned is you got to be careful also what you say, because it can be taken the wrong way. I have a slogan that I like that is considered I date a lot of ideas, but I only marry a few.
Yeah.
Um, I'd have to be careful sometimes walk in the office saying, oh, that wall would probably really look good red. Well, I might come back in the next day and somebody painted the wall red. Well, I didn't really mean that. It was just something I was testing out. I was trying to vet it. And so I had to be careful also about making suggestions that somebody didn't think that's exactly what it was that I wanted to go do. And, I tried to make sure that as I was making decisions, I would vet them and I would get the input from members of the team on what I was thinking, and wanted to make sure if I heard, good feedback, either positive or negative, before I would make a decision. Well, you had to make sure you had people that would talk back to you, let you know whether something was wrong, and not just assume that because you said it, that was going to be the law going forward. And so you really did need to be careful on what you voiced and how you voiced it, and let people know exactly what your mindset was when you were asking them a question.
One of the things that we've found in our work is working when there's sort of mergers and acquisitions. And so, one of the healthcare organizations, that whatever town the hospital was located in, that hospital had a very different culture. And so if they were merging, that was always a challenge for them, is how do I sort of maintain my local integrity and be a part of the larger company culture? And I think people have a tendency to assume that universities are sort of monolithic in culture, but they're really not. At least I don't think. An arts and sciences based university versus agriculture versus sort of the engineering and technology focus that mine's had. How do you hold that kind of sense of cultural integrity for a campus when all of these things, right, especially now in these times, all these kinds of things are going on around universities?
Yeah, it's a tough time. I mean, our university was predominantly engineering and science, with a little bit of management in, but that didn't mean you didn't have a department of arts and sciences, or excuse me, arts and humanities. And so you have different disciplines, even in a small university that's focused entirely on STEM. And so you have to make sure you're dealing with that. If you're talking about a land grant or an agricultural college, the same thing. It's usually a very comprehensive university, which means that you have a lot of different pieces in there, and making sure that you're providing a good, solid message. Especially if you're in a land grant type institution, because a lot of your staff may not be tenured faculty, but may be like research staff that are paid on 1 year contracts. And so they look at things a little bit differently as well. So it really is a diverse background. And I think there's probably a little art in how you deal and talk to all these different disciplines, and what kind of a mindset you have. I've always been at a comprehensive university. I've never been at one that is, let's say, just strictly liberal arts. And so I don't have any experience there, but I'm guessing that's a whole different ballgame from what I'm used to. I've always been at public universities. I've never been at a private. Again, it's a whole different viewpoint, I'm sure, on how you deal with things and how you really put these messages out when you're in that leadership position.
On Monday, I interviewed an engineer who he's based in Paris, France, but does a lot of work in the U.S. and in Canada and throughout Europe. And principally, he's an electrical engineer, and his work is in right now in mapping energy systems. And so he's really involved in what the whole interconnected energy system in Europe is like. And my son-in-law is an electrical engineer too in an aerospace company. And both of them have remarked about how they've, over their career, have advanced into management positions, and both have remarked how much they miss the technical work,
Mm-hmm.
a lot. And so, what advice might you have for young engineers as they're beginning to think, planning out their career or just starting it and seeing where it takes them?
Yeah, it's interesting is that my son also is an aerospace engineer at a aerospace company, just in his first level of management there, after being in the design. And I can see that same conflict with him is, well, I really want to go do the fun stuff, the engineering things, but I've got to work on, yearly evaluations and those kinds of things. And I can see that same struggle. And, I think that it is a balance. I kind of jumped into that management side, but I think you've got to look at what you think is good to you. And we all have different skill sets. And are you going to just want to stay technical your whole time? Or are you looking at management? And then how would you go learn if you want to move into that management side? How do you go take maybe a class or two or some seminars on the best way to handle that and how you handle people? Because it is a whole different role from what we learn when we're going through to be an engineer or to be a scientist.
It's one of the things that was a result of the pandemic for my son-in-law was they figured out how to do a lot of things they assumed they had to travel to do and be in person to do. They figured out how to do online. And so, he used to have to go because it's a global company all over the planet, which he wasn't keen on as a parent and being gone that much. So what are some of those kinds of changes you've seen in the field?
Yeah, I think that, as the pandemic came along and we started to be able to do these teleconferencing, the Zoom and the Skype, I think that made a big difference in how we were able to do business. There's still nothing like getting together face to face, but that technology really became available at the point where we really needed it. And it did allow us to do a lot of things that way. From a university, one thing that a university located in a northern climate is you don't really have to have snow days anymore
Right.
because you can wake up in the morning and say, okay, we're doing everything online today. We're not canceling class. And it's a whole different way of looking at what we do, and it actually is a real benefit. So the whole COVID-19, the pandemic, not only did you have to deal with different mindsets on how to go through it, but you had to figure out how you could continue to provide an education to students, even when you weren't necessarily all in the classroom together. And it was a challenge. And I know at our university, the faculty just did a fantastic job of transitioning online as needed and being able to keep using that resources that they would alone.
One of the areas that Kathy and I have really I started exploring 2 years ago, and Kathy about a year ago, and we really advanced our involvement is with artificial intelligence. And it's in the past 2 years, it's advanced significantly the quality of the product output, and we've used it quite a bit, a lot, almost exclusively for idea generation, in many ways. So what are some of your thoughts about the role of AI in science and in engineering and or wherever else you might give some thought to it?
It's been an interesting viewpoint. I mean, one, we travel a lot in an RV. One of the things we did is said, tell us how we should travel from North Carolina to Los Angeles, and came back with a route, gave us campgrounds and be places to stop and things you don't even think about using AI. Uh, One of the challenges at a university, we had a real dialogue, I guess I would call it, but there are different viewpoints on AI during from an academic perspective. Do you let the students use AI? Is that cheating? How do you know that they are actually doing the work?
Mhm.
To the other side of the coin is, well, if we're not teaching them to use AI, we're doing a disservice because once they get out into industry, they're going to be expected to use AI to help solve these problems. And so there was two different ways, really, and probably more, of looking at it from a university, from a faculty perspective. And it puts a little bit of a challenge in there: is how do you encourage them to use it so they're familiar, but not so much that they don't understand the basics of what it is they were doing, why they need that education in the first place.
There's quite an interesting article. I think it was in the Times, but how the OpenAI, the parent of Chat GPT, is creating this AI university um, program where they're offering to a university a platform customized for that university where every student can have their individualized chatbot,
Hmm.
and talking about how students are using them as like a learning partner so they don't have, they can interact with the chatbot and ask questions and or explain this to me in a different way. I'm not quite understanding it. It seems like AI is going to infiltrate higher ed, pretty substantially over time.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And I think the more we get to use it, I do think there are probably some guidelines that ought to be put in place, some rules that ought to be put in place to make sure that it's not abused. And I think that's a concern a lot of folks have. And, we need to make sure that we're using it wisely.
Yeah, it is interesting. Well, Jim, I appreciated our time this morning and wondering if you have some um, additional reflections you might like to share for folks, whether it's based on your experience at the university or, you've had a wealth of life experience and, we're really looking at this as kind of reaching it as a leadership conversation learning experience for those that watch.
Well, having, retired from the university, for almost a year ago, and then reading the things I see in the news, I think that the times at universities right now are going to be very challenging for the leadership. And I think that understanding the leadership roles in a healthy workplace, keeping those things in the forefront, making sure you continue to do what you feel is the right thing, I think will be a challenge going forward. But I think that our university leaders are up to that challenge, and I look forward to seeing how universities come out the other side of this.
Well, thanks, Jim. Really appreciate your time today, and we'll look forward to having this aired available publicly, probably in July, and a lot of good learning here. So really appreciate your time today.
No, thank you.
Go to worldviewprograms.com to learn more about our healthy workplace culture program options.